This is the FRC Roundtable, coming to you all the way from Minnesota. Your host team 2052 Nightcrawler presents this weekly FRC gathering where FIRST robotics competition teams take cooperation off the field. Share your knowledge, give and get advice, solve a challenge, or celebrate what makes your team special. 3, 2, 1, go!
It's all process.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Surprise, it's Joseph.
We'll probably give it till 7:05. Let people filter in. I almost have the notes set up, so I will drop those in the chat here.
Well, students, it's your show. You guys can kick it off whenever you want.
Okay, well, why don't we have each of us introduce ourselves. Hi, I'm Lexi. I'm from 2052 Nightcrawler.
My name's Gabby. I'm from 2531 RoboHawks.
I'm Ian. I'm from from 3926, The Emperors.
I'm Phoebe. I'm from 2491 No Mythic, and I am a graduating senior, so I've been mostly I'm supporting and giving opinions, but mostly they'll be talking.
Okay. So, did Paige?
Yeah, I did. I'm Paige. I'm from 6045 Saber Robotic.
Awesome. Okay. I think that is all of us that are here already on the board tonight. For any students who are interested in, joining onto this after, learning about what we're kind of interested in tonight, let us know. We can connect you with that. So let's start with kind of what our situation for starting the FUM Student Advocacy Board, and just, kind of like our mission behind this idea. Let's see, I think our first one is geographical diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one thing that we kind of noticed in a lot of the leadership boards within Minnesota, like the FUME board and a couple of others that we saw, was that a lot of the geographical diversity is within the metro area. And I think we only saw one or two that weren't in the metro area when, we have a state of over 200 teams, I'm pretty sure. And, the Metro does have a lot of teams, but there's a lot of teams that just aren't heard from in these meetings. And we think that a lot of students, aren't given the opportunity. And just because, and teams as a whole just aren't given the opportunity that they need to advocate for themselves. And so that's one of the things is we wanted to give geographical diversity just within Minnesota. We're looking maybe at the Minnesota State High School League, how they divide up all the teams, and then we find one from each of the sections. And that's kind of what we've been following so far in regards to kind of getting students involved in the board, so that way we can keep track of that. But then we also wanted to give an opportunity for student advocacy, because we feel like there isn't a lot of opportunities for students to kind of advocate for student interest, while in a lot of organizations kind of similar to FIRST, like DECA or HOSA, they have a student board. And so we kind of wanted to start one up within FIRST and kind of give students just an opportunity to be heard and to help with student communication throughout the state. And Ian, Paige, do you guys have anything? Lexi, about anything you want to add? Or is that a good intro?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think the original idea for this board started as something that Gabby said on the Minnesota North Star thread on Chief Delphi. And so we kind of were like, that's actually a really cool idea. And then we kind of ran with that.
Yeah, and I think it's another one of our bullet points is, student communication. And, something that I've noticed is it was really helpful for me to join the Twin Cities teams captain Discord. But of course, that only is for Twin Cities teams. And so I think there's a lot of teams in Minnesota that have student leadership and have students with ideas, but there's not a great framework for them to express that, especially, when we look at teams that have less resources and, if they have outreach goals and things, working with other teams, pooling those resources is a great way to do that. And so creating essentially a framework for communication is something that would benefit teams all around Minnesota, because it would just build those relationships. And I think that's something that this kind of board and opportunity could easily do. I know mentors have hub meetings and stuff, and I think if students had the opportunity to have that could be really great. That's something that we're kind of trying to do with this call, but expanding it, I think, is just a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kind of just, this was kind of what we wanted the meeting is kind of get advice from like mentors and, people that are kind of working up in like the leadership board and just kind of get some advice on like what we can do just to help out Minnesota first, because that's why we're here, is to help bring up Minnesota first and also just like the upper Midwest. So I think that's our kind of end goals, is to just help everyone that we can. But we are just students, so we do want some adult support too. So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing with adult support and mentor support is that, as students, we're only in this program unless you come up through FLL, we're only in FRC for 4 years, maybe 5 if you joined as an 8th grader, but that's not a lot of time to get to know the more bureaucratic side of things. And so there are a lot of things that adults know that we can, we might not know, but we could benefit from. And so that's, at least from my perspective, one of the reasons I really wanted to do this call tonight was just to, get some feedback from people who are knowledgeable about, the first upper Midwest system or how these things work, to get some ideas and feedback on issues that we think are important and how we can address them.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to maybe list off some of the kind of things we want to address and some of the ideas we have?
Yeah, so when we were kind of talking about when we started this, like in general, the things we were looking for, we kind of noticed there's like a bunch of different areas, but a lot boiled down to we wanted to be able to improve team experience, team competitiveness, and the competition experience for teams. And we kind of, the more you break those down, it kind of gets into a lot of different areas. So we kind of talked about how, one of the biggest things that helps teams is being able to be connected with other teams. And so what we really want to have is the ability for, a better way, because right now in Minnesota it feels very disjointed for communicating with other teams. Like, for example, I know that until probably last year, our team didn't have very many relationships with other teams, and we were kind of just trying to build a robot in the dark, and so one of our main priorities, right, is to hopefully figure out ways to increase that communication. I'll let someone else talk about the next one.
Paige, do you want, or did Paige just leave? I think I might have just saw her.
I think she might have gotten disconnected.
Yeah, that's what I think. I can talk about the next one is kind of just like the mentors, sponsors, and students aspect of it. And so right now, what we've kind of heard is just because there's the threat of like the recession and everything, and like a lot of teams are losing their legacy support that maybe had started up their teams. And I feel like a lot of teams are really struggling with finding more funding, more like mentor support, because like even in like the metro area, well, they may have not, they might have the mentor support, or, they might have the sponsorship, like they don't really have like all three, like, and so like one of the hardest things is like when teams are, basically what we kind of found, like when we were kind of breaking it down, is like when teams aren't thriving correctly, it breaks down into like mentors, sponsors, and students. And so if you don't really have one of those, like if you have mentors and you have money, but you have no students, then how are you going to, like, you can still build the robot, but you aren't really helping bring up, the students that, first is supposed to be impacting. But if you have the mentors and the students, you might not have, all the materials you need to build the robots. And so one of the things is that we want to help expand the resources so that way all teams in Minnesota have, they have mentor support, or they have money, and that can mean advocating at the state level, but it also can mean helping advocate for them at, their county level or at their city level, and helping maybe get a bit more funding just through like taxpayers' money, or advocating at their school board, but giving resources so that way teams can maybe advocate a bit more like in their area and making sure that, they all kind of have the support they need. And we have one other like kind of main point. I'll pass it over to someone else if someone else wants to take that.
I can do competitiveness, but I just wanted to add on to what you said about the Mentor sponsors and students. I think something that a lot of teams run into, and this comes up in competitiveness as well, is even if, we're looking to get more sponsors or we're looking to get more students, it is so hard to do that without a framework. And so having, a student advocacy board that is a center where teams could go and say, okay, here are resources that we have prepared on, ways to write sponsorship letters, or, these are things to ask your school board for, stuff like that, because, it is hardest to come up with ideas like when you are in the middle of, the crisis or the struggling. And so maybe one way that we improve the communication is also just like having resources available for teams. Yeah. And so, and that ties into, one of the points we have with building up competitiveness, which we really see more as, we have so many teams in Minnesota, but especially when we look at, metro-based regionals, we have teams that it's week 5, but they still are showing up to competition, with maybe not a lot of code or major mechanical errors, and basically those regionals tend to be less competitive because the teams that are attending them don't have the resources like to get their robots up to speed in the way that they would want them to be. And so making those regionals more competitive is in turn giving those teams, the ability to get more resources for themselves. And tied into that is the fact that I think what we've seen is about 66% of teams in Minnesota only go to one regional. And, within the regional system, that means that, we have a lot of Minnesota teams who won't go to champs just because they only go to one, and, it's very difficult to win. So part of, if we can increase our regional competitiveness, that can allow teams to, have a better competition experience, and we can essentially let more and different Minnesota teams go to Worlds, because I think something that we see a lot is a lot of the same legacy teams go to Worlds every year. And it is an important opportunity, to allow those teams to go that maybe haven't gotten to as much. And also, if they do qualify, kind of as we talked a little bit about last week, qualifying is both a blessing and a curse, because a lot of the teams, if they do qualify, now it's a question if they can even go because they don't have the resources to do that. So, the competitiveness is kind of a whole lot of things, but the idea is, getting more teams to the level where they can just really compete at a high level.
Yeah. And like kind of just to go off of that is like building up competitive. That's kind of like our overwhelming goal, but kind of how we want to help is like within like our resources and stuff is like during some of the preseason regionals, we want to create like a website or something and like a social media account. So that way we can have kind of all the resources on a website, and then people could sign up for an email list. Because one thing we did notice within communication, and this was brought up in the chat, was that it's very difficult with communication. And we were thinking if we can go to some of the preseason regionals, and also if we have students from kind of all areas of Minnesota, they all have their own like preseason regionals and stuff they attend, where we can maybe get some of this information out, and then we could create our own like newsletter, because sometimes like the fume and like just their emails are so long and so hard for students to read. I know we have very short attention spans. And so if we can maybe, I don't know, like if some of you have seen like the Daily Brew, I'm pretty sure is what it's called, but just kind of helping simplify it down to like what students can read. So that way we can maybe start to get some of the students more involved, because, you know, students can be a very big, you know, person within their team and like a big group, because that's, you know, who's all like working on it. And so just like getting the students more involved, if we can give the students more resources, maybe their mentors can also help to become more involved, and like making sure that, you know, the students also have a voice.
Yeah, and like even as a student who tries to read, you know, everything first related, I can, like, you know, I sign up for like all the newsletters that I find and stuff. I think that like even like halfway through the season, it was like, oh, you haven't been, because like there's the newsletter, right? But then there's also the First Northland newsletter you have to be signed up for. But then also at the same time, you know, there's like the probably your regional hub, or, you know, everything else that is, you know, sending out information. And, you know, it feels like a lot of times the information gets just lost within the shuffle of everything. And so having, you know, a streamlined way to do that. But, you know, part of that is also, and this is something Phoebe talked about a lot, is we want to emphasize that we don't want to contribute to the problem in the way where it's like now there's just like, you know, an extra thing that is doing stuff in the region. And now you have to worry about, okay, so there's hubs, but then there's also FUM, but then there's also FRC Northland. And then there's the student advocacy board thing. And you have like all of these different boards that are all, and that is definitely, you know, one area we want to avoid, which obviously is tricky from the perspective of you're trying to start a new thing without making more new things.
I think to speak to that, if I can, I also, my voice is dead. I just need to acknowledge it before I keep talking. But I think that that's part of why we're thinking about like, where can we hook in and where does it make sense for a group like this to connect. I personally, like, I'll just speak for myself and not for the rest of the people, but I think it would be nice to connect with FUM and have it actually be you know, an official piece of the FUM leadership is actually having student leadership involved. So that way there could be some connection through there and make it less of a, you know, separate item, right? It's like has recognizability. And but I also wanted to note that like I was just, you know, Gabby and Lexi and Ian were talking about all of these issues that they're interested in working on. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that we know that there are a lot of adults out there already trying to work on these issues. And the goal of talking about them is not to be like, nobody knows about these things, but to be like, to demonstrate, I think that there's student interest and excitement in also working on these issues and trying to figure out how students can get involved in a meaningful way in actually contributing and bringing our ideas to the table as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we kind of summed it up in one line, is that everyone is kind of looking at their own area and we aren't, and so we kind of disregard Minnesota as a whole. And so there may be people working on this, you know, on the other side of the state, but I'm not involved in any of those circles. So I have no clue what's happening over there. And that's why we kind of want to kind of have that geographical diversity, is because there's such a disconnect where we don't understand, or we don't not understand, but we just don't know where all these resources are. And just so that information gap, you know, we're trying to help shorten that.
Yeah. And
yeah.
I would say that there's also, I think, a part of it of, you know, within that information gap, like, you know, if people who are on the call tonight, right now we have, you know, I guess on the current board, because Paige is from Central Minnesota, we have someone from 5232 Talons, who was unfortunately not able to make it. But, you know, besides that, the first people we were able to find were, you know, all the people in the metro area, because we kind of already are networked together with Twin Cities team captains, where it was, you know, fairly easy, where it was like, we have someone from the West Metro, the East Metro, and then like kind of like the inner city. And so we kind of already had that to begin with, but then like we were talking about like how do we connect with teams from like up north, like I guess I went to the pits for Fred at Champs. They're like send us an email, but like besides that, it's I think a lot harder to create a network when there isn't one already there, and your only networking events are 48 hours of hecticness where everybody has more important things to be doing. So in some ways there's like, how can we find, ways to increase communication other than, the twice or three times a year meetups where we're actually all competing for something. And so, not the top priority. And yeah.
Okay, I have lots of thoughts, but I also don't want to take over the call. This is your call. Is there something specific? So I should probably give you a little bit of my background so that you might have more ideas on how I can help. I am part of the Coaches Association. I'm on the board of directors. I am the treasurer, but I'm also the representative for Section 4, which is the mostly Northwest Metro. And so I know all the other state section representative for the Coaches Association. I can get you in touch with any of those folks if you're looking for anyone from a kind of a specific area of the state. So for sure you'll have a contact with at least one team because their team is in that section, but hopefully they will hopefully have a way to connect you with more teams. I'm also an organizer for our hub, which is called the Roseville Hub. I recently took that over, so I can speak to the hub experience and why mentors participate, what they get out of it, and how that all works if you're interested in more hub-related details. From a broader perspective, I've been an entrepreneur for about 15 years. I've talked to people about raising money for business. I've talked to people about raising money for the team. I have a little bit of insight into what it's like to try to get government money or money out of a school system. So I could talk to that a little bit too and share any advice on fundraising. I'm also the treasurer for 2052 Nightcrawler. Our annual budget usually falls somewhere between $75,000 and $95,000 a year. That's managed by the nonprofit, also mostly considered a booster club as far as the school is concerned. So that's how much money we manage to run the team. Our level of support with the school this year has been one paid coach and a school bus, 2 school buses to get us to events, 3 school buses, something like that. We pay for all the trips, all the uniforms, all the robot parts. Basically anything that's not our one paid coach or a bus to get us to an event inside the state of Minnesota, the Booster Club pays for it. All right, with all of that said, and I know there are similar people to that on the call mentor-wise. I heard you say that you wanted advice from mentors. How can I help?
Yeah, so I would be interested in how we can connect with the mentor groups, whether that's hubs or coaches associations, so that they can bring the opportunity of this board to their students. Is that something that is best done over email, or we come to a meeting? Like, what is the best way to connect on that?
Someone brought up, how do you get connected with teams? And Jesse, was it Jesse? Somebody posted in the chat, David posted in the chat, it's really hard to get connected with teams. And that's 100% true. So as the second section representative for Section 4, it took me about a year to get connected, to get the contact information for about 80% of the teams in my section. So the coaches I represent, I still don't have contact information for some of those teams that I technically represent for the Coaches Association. There is no central repository that we kind of have public access to. Now, having said that, Nicole Shosau, I'm not sure I'm saying that her name incorrectly. Nicole just hosted a meeting with what I think was all of the hubs in the state of Minnesota on Thursday last week. And Nicole is I believe she's a first paid employee to cover the Midwest. Okay, so Phoebe knows. And so Nicole, one of the things Nicole's trying really hard to do is to reinforce or solidify the hub network so that every team feels like they sort of have a hub that they can participate with. And currently there's a gap in Southwest Minnesota, which I don't believe has a hub coverage. But most of the rest of the state has a coalition. They have a hub. They have a different ones. Different places use different words, but that similar type of concept. The way that I established my mailing list is I printed up QR codes and I went to every event that we were in, except for state, because I pretty much had everybody covered at that point, at least in my section for state. But I did that at Northern Lights. Northern Lights, and I think I actually hit the Lake Superior pits as well, and then also at 10K, and I gave them a QR code. I gave my pitch, and I said, please scan this QR code and have all your coaches give me their contact info if you're interested in participating. I had a little Google form, and what's interesting about that, and I haven't checked this since 10K, but I was able to get an average of 2 to 3 coaches per team, and I think I got about 80% coverage. And in the questions I asked, I said, would you be interested in doing events with other teams in Section 4? And would you be willing to share your contact information with other Section 4 coaches? All but one of the people that responded said yes to both questions. So there is an interest of coaches getting in contact with other coaches and being willing to share. So I think that's super encouraging, and I expect that probably is across the state. The trick is just getting that initial contact. I will say that Nicole shared with us that if you're trying to get in touch with a specific team, to contact Nicole, she would reach out to the contact info she has for that team through the first registration website. So all mentors have to go, well, not all mentors, but at least 1 or 2 or 3 representatives for all teams have to go into the first system and register themselves, just like you guys all have to register yourselves as students. She might be the only person in Minnesota who has access to that list. She said she would reach out to them saying, so-and-so from such and such a team is trying to get in contact with you. Is it okay if I forward their information? It's not a great system. They're working on trying to build something into the website where you can say, sort of like, have you ever been to a website where they say contact us form and you fill out the online web form, but you have no idea where that email is going? She's looking at trying to create a similar system to that. She's talking to the people who run their website to say, can we create the system to say, I want to contact Nightcrawler. Here's the message I want sent to them. And then behind the scenes, it sends a sort of assistant email off with that information. So she's trying to make an easier way to hide the contact information from a privacy point of view, but to give you the ability to get in touch with those teams. And in the meantime, she's willing to be the go-between person to do that. So that would be my best advice in terms of how do you get in touch with other teams, is that you got to do the legwork like I did to get in touch with my Section 4 coaches, or to contact Nicole and see how she can help you.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, maybe on our end, we can talk about with, our different section representatives and kind of working through that. Yeah.
Do you have a Discord that is set up for captains, right? Do you have a Discord?
Twin Cities.
Do you just have a Discord for like all Minnesota First students that they can join?
Yeah, you go, Phoebe. You go.
Okay, I was gonna say I think that there may be something like that exists. The server that I have set up that's been mentioned several times is specifically for team captains in the Twin Cities metro area. But I feel like Ian, if anybody would know, it would be you.
I do know. So I'm in 3 Minnesota student Discord servers. About 1 pops up per year, and they all die within a month or 2 of creation.
That sounds about right.
That's the status we're at right now.
So why do they die? Why do you think that they die?
So the first one I joined when it was already dead. I don't know how I got the invite link to that one. The second one, a lot of it was given out at North Star Regional in 2022. And people just stopped really talking in it. Like there just hasn't been too much activity in the latest one, which I think is being helped run by the Minute Bots, which I got the link to at State this year. I mean, it's still alive, and I mean, it looks to be more active than the others, but it seems like there's definitely, in some ways, people just aren't really, there's not much constructive that happens in the servers. And, for the most part, it's just people, like versus Twin Cities Team Captains, which has, all of one channel. So everything that happens, constructive or not, right, is going into that channel. So, for the most part, people are going to be keeping on topic because, you want to keep the server, doing serving its purpose. But because it's, a purpose-driven server, I think, is what makes it successful versus a server that kind of has no aim, right, where it just exists for existence's sake. And, sometimes something of value will pop up in there, but at the same time, a lot of it's going to be, people having fun and joking around, which, there's nothing wrong with that being in a Discord server.
Right. So let me put my entrepreneur hat on. And so I've been through tons of pitches with investors. And the first question I have is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? So if your Discord server, your product is not capturing customers and keeping them around, which in your case is just audience, you're not solving a problem that they care about. The other side of it is because I'm a game developer and my business is actually mobile gaming, is that I'm not actually trying to solve a problem. I'm only creating problems by distracting people from something productive, right? So if you're not trying to solve a problem, then how are you keeping people entertained or interested? So a Discord server, we use primarily Slack at Nightcrawler, but I'm part of Discord servers for my game. And I see what happens in there. And there's 2 things that happens in there. There's people that complain about things and other people who are trying to talk them off a cliff and pull them back to reality and say, okay, it's not that bad, or here's how you can solve your problem. So it is sort of problem solving. There are parts of that Discord server where people are like, what if we did this, right? And people are workshopping ideas and trying to get me to do things with my game to make it more entertaining for them. And then there's just channels where people are making jokes and jibes at each other and stuff like that. That's my experience with Slack, and that's my experience with Discord too, is that those servers survive because you either solve problems or you keep people entertained. And so if you want to run a successful Discord server, I think you have to keep those 2 things in mind. And unfortunately, it may be up to the leadership to sort of prime the pump on that every single week to make sure that it stays active. It's kind of a crappy thing, and it requires a ton of dedication, but until it lives organically, the leadership has to be the one that keeps it alive.
Yes.
I have a funny little side story, but I was at an entrepreneur conference one time, and on stage, they invited the founders of Reddit to come in and talk about how they started Reddit. And it turns out that the first 200-ish accounts on Reddit were 100% fake. The 2 founders spent all day, every day, for months, pretending to be 200 different accounts and having conversations with themselves about, oh, I found this thing, this is really cool, or you're not going to believe what this person said, and creating all these accounts to create these conversations. And then suddenly, over time, they had to do less and less of that because there was actual accounts having actual discussions that kept all that stuff alive. It sort of underscores the necessity of, if you want to start a community, You can't just say, okay, we're a community, but you have to sort of by sheer will force that to be able to take root so that everybody will stick around and say, oh, this is kind of interesting. I'm going to check in on this tomorrow, or I'm going to check in on it, every day or every week. I like the idea of creating a student group. I really wish students would do a better job of having friendships and relationships and communicating with other teams. I love it when our students come to meetings and say, hey, you know what so-and-so team is doing? They're doing this crazy thing. It's so awesome. They're going to build a robot that jumps over the charge station. I think that's awesome. I love that. But it doesn't just happen. You guys, if you want that to happen, my best advice is you got to brute force that conversation around purpose or around entertainment.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think part of the reason that the Twin Cities one works is everybody who is there knows that if they have a problem or a question, like they ask it and immediately people will come up with responses and answer. And so it's not like sending and emailing to avoid and just being like, I don't know, like, you're going to get that response. So I totally agree.
Now, I've mentioned the Discord, and I did that on purpose. My experience with email isn't great for students, but it's also not great for adults, right? Everybody's sort of moved on to real-time communications. I'll be honest, I check my business email once every 2 days, maybe every 3 days. I know there are other people that are every time their computer beeps, they go check their email. I'm not one of those people anymore. But if I get a Slack message, I'll see that Slack message probably within 2 hours. So I think the way people communicate has changed, and creating a mailing list, a newsletter, there's definitely reasons to have a newsletter. We do this call on a weekly basis, and you all show up because I send out a weekly update of, hey, we're going to do this call. I read all the weekly newsletters that Nicole sends out. But a lot of times I'll miss it or I'll skip it. I'll be like, I don't have time for this. And by the time I do come back to it, it's already a week late and all the information's out of date. So you probably will have to do multiple different ways of communicating. But unfortunately, all those different ways take time, and they take a different sort of strategy and approach to building it successfully.
Yeah, I mean, you can go, Phoebe.
You can go.
Okay. Well, I will just say, with running the different weekly update for Nightcrawler, yes, absolutely. One way is not enough. But if you have the right structure and the right process, in terms of my case, I write the weekly update, and what I send out on email, on Slack, and on the website and what I read on the podcast is the exact same. Like, I refuse to rewrite anything, because I already spend, an hour and a half doing it. So I think, and I think also different communication methods can be used for different things, right? Like, if you want a problem answered, yes, that is real-time communication, absolutely. But if we're saying, here's our resource of the week, right? Or, here's the next month of this is when a week 0 event's happening. This is when, a preseason competition. Like, if it's just once a month an email goes out and it has your entire month calendar, I think something like that that's more static is fine in that scenario. And then, websites are more archival, right? If we're creating resources that are like, here's how you write a sponsorship letter, here's different, this is a page where a bunch of different teams have contributed, their Lego camp ideas or how they recruit new students, right? Something that just stays, I think that's also fine. I think it's knowing, who your audience is for that and what the purpose is, and not expecting everything to work the same.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do the team communication for my team too. And we have a team Discord. We use we have an email. We have, we have subgroups that use Slack. We have subgroups that use Remind. You all kind of and then it all kind of gets conglomerated together. And we tried this year to kind of get it all towards email, just because that's what our mentors really wanted. And we told all our students that, hey, you're going to be having to check your email. And so setting that expectation in advance, I think helped. But like in a situation like these, like we'll spend an hour like formatting something, but then you send that out everywhere. And that's kind of how you try and get the biggest, group of people, is just by sending it out and figuring out what works best for people.
I also think there's a question of like the different levels of, just because you were talking about the Discord server, and I was going back to thinking about the idea of having a smaller group of like students involved in leadership, like a committee that's like, how many sections are there in Minnesota? I don't know, like
I think there's 7.
8.
I can look it up. I think there's 7.
All right.
Okay. It's either 7 or 8.
Approximately that many students involved in like a leadership committee or something, who then are going back and communicating to people in their section. And a group like that is like a smaller group, and then the people you're trying to reach is a larger group of people. I don't know if I'm making sense. I just don't necessarily want to conflate the two things. Like, I think that the interest that I'm hearing is in creating a smaller group involved in leadership that's then trying to communicate to a larger group of people.
Yeah, and I could see something where, you join a Minnesota Discord, but most of your communication happens in your section channel, right? In the same way that, just because, like, trying to imagine a 200 team, I think it's just going to be chaos. And also, like, we can increase communication with people from around the state, but, realistically, a team from all the way up north is not going to, like, be at a school, from South Minnesota, like, helping that. It's much harder to do that. So I think facilitating those close connections and then having an opportunity for like larger discussion. But yeah, I think there's, like you said, levels of groups, and like making that small group connection is important.
I found the list. There are 8 sections on the list. If anybody wants to know what section they're in, just give me your number and I'll fix it. I'll find it out.
Yeah. Like, one thing I think why the Minnesota FRC servers kind of don't really work well is because they don't really have their purpose is, to help, have students have like a spot to like talk to other robotics kids, but there's not really a main purpose. And like, I feel like what I see is just like, there's one kid that's like, oh, I want to create like a Minnesota server, but there's not really like a like purpose, or there's not really a reason. And then, there's a couple, like, their friends will join it, but it won't really be, or like they'll send it out at like competitions, but there's not really a purpose. There's not really a reason. And I feel like the Twin Cities Discord channel, like what's like the captain's one, it's really helpful because like you can ask like a problem or something and like you'll have someone respond right away. But there's also like kind of a level of like jokiness and seriousness that I feel like, we don't really have kids that I feel like, I mean, you kind of talked about this like on your game server, how like there's people like, might be on the brink of like, different situations. And so I feel like there's just a different level, like we're all talking about like robotics issues. And like, I feel like that also helps just like with the server and keeping it like kind of a bit more like serious, if that makes sense. And I think that really helps to keep people involved, because if there's just a bunch of people, that, might be saying like depressing things, like people aren't really going to want to be there and talking about stuff. And so I feel like that's something that the Twin Cities like captain server is really good at, like there's just a level of like, I don't want to say like maturity, but like we're all like the leadership like representatives for our teams. And so I feel like just that level, like we all have like shared experiences. And I think that helps too.
Well, Gabriella, do you go by Gabriella?
Gabby. I'm on my school account right now.
All right. So, Gabby, I think you bring up a really good point. And there's something to be said about being exclusive as well. People want to go. There's this saying in when you price a product in business, there's always the next velvet rope. Like, what do I get with this kind of money? What do I get with this kind of money? And businesses kind of always want the top tier support and features and stuff like that. The enterprise plans on the internet never list a price. because you get that sense of exclusiveness. It might be a good idea for you guys to set up a Discord or chat room or whatever you do and call it the Minnesota FRC Leadership Discord. And you might have some students kind of quote unquote sneak in there because they want to be part of the cool kids club, but they're also going to probably want to contribute to show that they're a leader. And then just by the way you phrase your audience of, hey, if you're in here, you're part of this group of wanting to be a leader, it might accomplish your exact goals that you're saying here, is that we want the kind of students who want to be part of making things better. And maybe just naming it a certain way might filter out the people of, oh yeah, I'm just here to screw around. I don't want to be part of these conversations, and they may self-opt out. I'm not saying that you should have to like present your driver's license and show us on your website that you're a captain on the team or a sub-team leader or something. I'm more or less just saying, maybe just very clearly state, here are the objectives of being part of this. Here's what our expectations are for helping other teams or asking for advice. And that might be all you need to do to kind of create the tone, create the culture of what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
One thing that we might be able to do is almost like make it a leadership thing, but then also make like subgroups of, okay, here's the Midwest chat, here's the like Northwest chat, like make it different subgroups so that like everyone can talk to their own hub, but then also have a chat where it's just general and make it so that everyone can also add their opinion to whatever's happening.
Yeah, that could actually be interesting because the way Twin Cities team captains is run right now, and Phoebe could probably expand more on this than I could. But I talked to Phoebe a lot about like the future Twin Cities team captains that's getting handed off and all that stuff. But it would be interesting to see if that model is done for other regions. Like obviously there's the Twin Cities team captains, but there's no reason there can't be Central Minnesota team captains in the same way. And be interesting to see if that was up. But then there's also a collective meeting place for all the captains across the state that might not necessarily be about getting help on how do I captain better, which we wanted to keep it fairly small because we didn't want to be super busy with other questions getting buried before questions got answered, and we're already hitting that capacity number anyways. But it would be interesting if there was like a collective one that was specifically about improving Minnesota, the things that are relevant to all Minnesota.
Can I shift what we're talking about a little bit, or would you like to? This is a question for Lexi and Gabby and Ian and Paige. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I'm curious for advice on the idea of like the more general question of how can students hook in to leadership, and what in the problems and the issues that Lexi and Gabby and Ian especially were talking about, where do you see a place for students to take part in finding solutions?
I like what you said about having student involvement in FUM. I think that's something you should definitely approach the FUM leadership on and say, we'd like to be part of the solution and be part of those discussions. Lexi has probably shared with you that captains and mentors have a weekly meeting in Nightcrawler, and decisions get made about how the team does things with both student and mentor input. For all the events we do, all the things we buy, all the scheduling we do, it happens with captains and mentors. And asking if you can be part of that conversation with higher level organizations, I think is a question worth asking. They might say no because of this or because of that. I mean, I don't know what those reasons would be, and they very well could have legitimate reasons not to, but I also don't know why they wouldn't want some of that input. So I think you should approach the fund board. I'm confident you guys know how to get in touch with fund. One of the Nightcrawler mentors is on fund, so Lexi certainly has a contact point there as well. And I think that's appropriate. Are there specific issues that you want advice on? That I mean, I don't know what advice I could give, but if are there specific issues in terms of hooking into mentor groups or anything like that?
I don't know that there's issues. Well, Ian, maybe you have an answer. Go for it.
I was gonna say it'd be interesting to see where the other adults in this call would be, thinking about what the most pressing things they would like, a student advocacy board in specific to address.
Maybe we should start with this. Are you curious to know what the hub mentors talk about when they meet? So the Roseville Hub meets every Saturday morning for breakfast before we all go to our Saturday meetings. We talk about, where am I going to find these parts? They're sold out. They've been sold out for weeks. Does anybody have a gearbox we can borrow? Does anybody have compliant wheels we can borrow? There's a lot of bartering for parts that happens at the Saturday breakfast. Occasionally, a mentor will bring up saying, I have a problem with one of my students or one of my captains. How do I mitigate this issue? Do you have suggestions for how we resolve this conflict or things like that? And they'll be asking. I've actually been at my advice has been sought several times because I'm a programming captain, or one of the things I do is I've got this lead programmer who refuses to work with any other students on the team or won't help with training or blah, 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 things like that. And do you have any advice on how I can get this person to work with the other students or train, participate in training or stuff like that? That's a very common thing that mentors seek from one another is, how do I help my students be better captains or better leaders? And we have that type of advice. We occasionally will talk about robots being built. Some people are more open than others. Some people don't like to share their secret sauce until they have something that's functionally working. And I think you guys probably all get that. And then others will ask, how are you going to avoid tipping over, or what type of drivetrain you're going to use, or, things like that. Have you ever considered this? Have you ever considered that? And we just kind of share advice in those ways. We don't really talk about funding. I mean, we've had some fundraising talk and people have said, hey, do you mind if our team does fundraising like that and contacts that person? There's been some of that, but for the most part, it's just a place for mentors to get together and talk about other mentors and just kind of feel like, okay, I guess I'm not doing such a bad job after all type thing, and get that reassurance from other mentors that you're doing okay. I have a feeling that your captain's group is probably that support network as well, right? So it's not really all that different. No major decisions are made in hub meetings at all. I mean, I can't think of one single thing in a hub that happened in a hub meeting that impacted any teams. It's just kind of more of a social support network, honestly. Jesse, do you have a different experience with your group up in the Arrowhead? Or no, you're in Central.
We're North Central.
Yeah,
Central
you're
Minnesota.
Central.
But yeah, our hub meetings are a lot more probably business-y oriented. We're a 501c3, and we're talking about our NMRC championship, where the money's going to come from, where teams can stay, how we're going to get that funded. We're talking about our programming camp that we collaborate with our local university on, and that kind of stuff, and who's going to volunteer and who's going to run that. But it's cool. I mean, I know it's tough for you younger folks on the call here. I mean, you guys are the exceptional group of Minnesota, because you guys are the ones that are obviously involved, right? Because you're doing these things already. And I wish I had more people on my team that were involved with folks like you. But one thing I was thinking, I mean, we have, and Scott knows, we have our Slack channel that we're on, and we have a group that's about the state tournament. We have some random stuff. We have our Improving Minnesota First and General, and a couple other things that people jump in and out of. But maybe, this is just a suggestion, but maybe, I've I got a couple young impact award ladies that, could use some guidance from people that have experience with that. And I can't give them that. And I can't give them a student perspective on that. And I would be very happy to share some information with them on a Discord or a Slack if you guys have something created. And I think they might be interested in being involved in that. But just maybe having one of those things and dividing it up into different subsections of the team. And then you can have, because a lot of teams have their leaders of X, Y, and Z. And maybe trying to get some kids involved. And I have contact information for all 31 teams in my hub, and I would happily send that to all the lead mentors of all of them. And you might get 5% student response on that kind of thing, but you might get 5 or 6 new kids that are willing to step up and be part of your elite group.
For us at Talon, we kind of have something similar. We have a thing called Southwest Hub, which is more so for like the students, and we try to set up meetings every month or so, probably every other month or so, where a team will host an event and teams will just come over and connect, and they do just fun games. I think one time it was dodgeball in a gymnasium. It was more just for networking purposes. Not too much business, but it's always been fun, and it kind of gets us to connect. And we do it through a Slack server.
I like that. I think the idea, I feel like this can serve both the social and the resource purposes for the standpoint of, maybe you have your section channel that leaders are a part of, and that's the more social connection and asking questions. But I like Jesse's idea of hey, I'm a build captain, I have an issue with how we're doing, how can we improve our prototyping process, or what are ways to reach out to local companies and get them to machine things for us. And so that idea of specialization in that way, it's almost a different form of exclusivity because it's specific to your sub team or your interest or your project. So yes, I like that a lot.
I had a thought. If you're looking for sort of a foot in the door for First Upper Midwest or with First in general, I can tell you that I know that one of the hardest thing that First is dealing with, and there's been a lot of talk on the socials this year about Minnesota should go to districts, or we need to have more smaller regionals, and there's been a lot of that conversation. I will tell you that I believe the biggest amount of pushback that I've heard on that is that we barely can get enough volunteers to run the events we do. How are we going to support districts, or how are we going to support regionals, and then the money that goes with it? Now, you guys might not be able to help a whole lot with finding the money that goes with it, but most of our volunteers are parents. And so going and saying, how can we help get more volunteers? How can we help get the word out to our families, of student families, to say, look, you don't have to just send your kid off to a meeting. You can actually go and participate as a referee, or as someone who directs traffic to load and unload robots, or just directs traffic in the hallway to stop kids from getting run over by a robot. There's lots of different volunteer roles that can be done, and not all of them require you to wear a striped shirt or a blue shirt or a yellow hat. If you guys were interested in making a big impact, I feel fairly confident that if you said we want to create a stronger volunteer supply, that would probably go over very well. Maybe not. I don't know. But I can tell you that if that's one of the things that you guys were thinking about in terms of your competitions, that we need more competitions, smaller competitions, something like that, the volunteer is a big concern that I've heard people bring up, of getting enough people to volunteer. So that would be one piece of feedback you may not be aware of. It sounds like Ian is aware of that. Maybe you guys have already talked about that. But I think it's a big roadblock to having more events personally.
Yeah, that's kind of how like we came up with the entire idea. Is we were on the like Chief Delphi thread, and I was like, oh, I didn't realize students could do more than being like the safety glasses handout, like, and that's kind of how we started coming up with like students have no idea that there's all these opportunities. Like I'm on a team of like 45 students. I'm a team captain. Half those kids are sitting in the stands, or they might be at their hotel, and I'm like, I could sincerely just be sending them off to go do volunteering, like at the competition. Like there's so many kids that kind of just sit around and do nothing besides like scouting.
Mm-hmm.
And like I have them all in rotations, but they still get bored during the regionals, or they're like, oh, I'm only here to scout. And like I feel like giving them more opportunities to get involved would also be helpful. And like I had no clue that we could do more with that. And that's kind of the main reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's an 18+ rule on some of those things, but like field reset crew, I mean, go do field reset at an off-season event or something like that. Or I know that we've had students before that did field reset at different competitions. I don't know if there's a rule that you have to be you can't be on a team that's competing, or you have to be a certain age, but those are all great questions to ask.
And I know that like something is like at the test last year, is it called mini trials or whatever it's called now. But like they had, this thing where, cause they didn't have volunteers, like if your students in the stands, right, and you're bored, we need field reset people. And so I think it was, students scoring, students doing field reset every match,
I was scoring. It was really fun.
And so like it was, almost all student run. And it wasn't that hard to, do. And like, I think almost every team had people volunteering at some point in the day. And, from a student perspective, obviously some of the more subjective thing, I'm not sure for official events, do you have to be like over 18 to be on field reset?
Jesse just posted in the message that there is an age limit. So
I think I still think it might depend on the role, though.
Because it let me apply for field reset at 10K Lakes because I didn't have school those days. So I applied to be on field reset because that was like the one that I was allowed to check off. But then they were overbooked with volunteers anyways because it was only Minneapolis.
But again, I think these are great conversations to have. Maybe there's a way that students can help, remove some of that burden. The challenge is, and maybe this isn't fair, but the challenge is okay, we have 3 people signed up, but are they going to show up? And students, I will say, a lot of them don't have their own transportation, right? So reliability could possibly be a limiting factor there. But again, I think these are conversations worth having. If you start out with, how can I help? Maybe the answer is going to be, I'm sorry, there just isn't a way, because if you're participating in the program, you can't be a judge. Well, that makes sense, right? I mean, that's just kind of the way it works. But there might be other places where there is something you can do.
Yeah, and I think
one other area that I would like to see some students step into, and this is a role I don't think students have ever even been asked to step into, is to be on the regional planning committees. I mean, these events are planned for students. There are no students on the regional planning committees as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know. So they're planning these events for you, but you don't have much say in what happens at them. Like what kind of workshops are presented, what kind of things are happening during them. What's important to you that happens at these events. It's, all these old people that are planning them for you. So I would like to see some of your voices be represented on those regional and state planning committees.
Yeah, and so I know, like, for example, there's a committee going on right now for FUM turning itself into a PDO that was, like, going around at state. And I took a photo, and so they were looking for, I think, one student on the board. Because I was talking to he was there in the conversation where I was like, because I think there should be more than one student on the board. Because I'm assuming, I know that Gabby has also already applied for that position. I've applied for that position. I'm assuming there's other people who are students in just our Discord server of 6 leaders who are very interested in the logistics of becoming a PDO who would want to apply. Where, I mean, there isn't, because the thing about students on the RPCs, there's nothing that says that it has to be only, because like I was looking at the application page, because there's just like a link to applications. But I think it's like kind of general consensus. But this is kind of a related side. I don't know, but a tangent on, I guess leadership of the student board. Like a lot of the things. Actually, this is probably a tangent to be put a hold on. That's my opinion of where the tangent is going.
Again, I think it's appropriate to ask. If you ask in a polite and a positive manner of, we want to help, how can we help? I think it's an appropriate thing to do. I think there are people who don't use a very GP attitude towards, we need to change, that create friction, and that creates problems and it creates roadblocks. But if you're approaching it from the right way, I think it's a valid question to ask of, we want to be a positive influence in here. How can we help? I don't know how that all works. I don't know. I don't have good advice other than be GP, be positive, and just ask.
Yeah. And, in terms of the volunteer thing, if we're connecting people around the state, I think first alumni, this is something that I've talked about in terms of our own team on Nightcrawler. And like, I feel like there are a lot of alumni that we just don't reach out to and who would be involved in that way, and I think there are a lot of people who leave the program and, maybe they're not at a place where they can be a mentor yet, but they still want to be involved, and, opening that up or continuing to push that message.
I think actually you may have hit on something very important here, is that getting alumni to go be robot inspectors and to be CSAs and to be on these roles that you kind of have to be out of the program and you have to be an adult to do. It's a great way to keep those people connected. It's a great way to get them back into a mentor role in the future. I'd love to see, if you guys are thinking about setting up a Discord server, I'd love to see you set up an alumni channel, because they'll network for helping each other find jobs and stuff too. I mean, there's a ton of value that you may be able to add by creating this network that goes beyond just the competition experience.
I think another thing in that area of how to get alums into those volunteer roles, and this is basically just going on a total tangent now, but looking at how to create interest in that for students while they're still in the program, because like if there could be, I don't know what the right avenue for this would be, giving some sort of like workshop or letting students shadow or doing stuff at off-season events, or I don't know what it is, but I think that there's a lot of like, there's the separation between like, here's what the students are doing at events and here's what the, volunteers are doing at events, the adults. And like you said, there's that age restriction. You can't necessarily have a student be doing judging or doing FTAing or whatever as a student, but figure out if there's something you can do, for the high school seniors to give them a chance to see how they could be engaged the following year, even in just small ways that provide an explicit invitation to come back and a chance to see what that might look like, so that it's not a black box of how somebody would get into volunteering once they're old enough to do so.
Yeah, an idea we kind of had during our first meeting is, so like one of our big ideas, like when we first got in, we were like, we need like a lot more support leading up to it, is having like a completely like student run preseason regional or something. And then we kind of scaled it down to maybe during the preseason regionals when there isn't as much as a like competitiveness, like, you know, some team isn't going to go to Worlds based off of how well they do at the preseason events, is maybe letting, you know, like the seniors or like the students get involved while they're still in high school. So that way they can gain experience, like build confidence within those roles. And that way they're like, oh, you know, when they're in college, they're like, oh, you know, I had a lot of fun volunteering at this preseason event, like back when I was still in high school, and already creating those connections back when they're still in the program, when, you know, there's not, because like regionals were like, oh yeah, you know, like those are pretty serious. Like we might not be able to get them in, but if we could have like a preseason regional where, you know, we're trying to actively recruit kids to be volunteers while they're still in the program before they've already left, and, you know, we might not have contact with them anymore, is, you know, getting those connections while they're still in high school, since there isn't a lot of that.
Even like instead of, you know, you have like an FDA who is usually FDing with first, and then you have a student who's like shadowing them and learning from them throughout the off-season event or something like that.
What if you guys set up learn to be a student robot inspector, and you had student robot inspectors for week zeros and for the preseason events, or CSAs who I can't talk to the radio, what's going on with the radio, and you go get a tech who can come over and help you figure out why your IP address is wrong on your radio. Maybe there's an opportunity there to do something cool, because, hey, if you're a senior and you learn how to be a robot inspector for a week zero, you're like, wait a minute, I did this last year. I could do this at 10K, or I could do this at Lake Superior or at Great Northern. You know, I'm going to school in Fargo. I should drive down to Great Northern and be a robot inspector for the weekend. If you've already done it once now, it doesn't seem quite so scary to say, yeah, I'll sign up and I'll take the official training to do that, be a volunteer. I think these are great ideas. I think there's a ton of potential in our alumni network that we don't tap. One of the things that we've been talking about for Nightcrawler is, should we bring our alumni back for summer meetings? Maybe that's a way to reconnect. This year and last year, we have four or five individuals who came back to be mentors 5 and 6 years after they graduated. It's been fantastic. It's been amazing. We're trying to figure out, how do we do more of that? How do we continue this pipeline of people that they get done with college, they get a job, they've got some free time, they don't have any kids yet, they're not married yet, they can come be a robotics mentor for a while, and maybe for a long while. But if you don't cultivate that pipeline of people, they sort of leave and go away, and you never see them again. How else can I offer advice with? I mean, you guys listed a ton of things at the start of this call. I'm happy to give whatever advice I can. You said we want mentor this, feedback on this, or support on this. What else can those of us who are on the call here provide?
I have a question kind of relating to students going to more coach-based meetings, of how to avoid the almost like, oh, it's a kid, like the not being taken seriously, because that happens quite often, and it often probably happens because of how we present ourselves. Is there maybe a suggestion you might have of a way to avoid that?
It's hard. And it's not just because you're kids. When you get into the business world, you'll experience the exact same thing. You'll be in a job for 1 or 2 years, and you'll be up against somebody who's been there for 15 years and thinks your question is silly because you just haven't been there long enough to know the difference. I'll admit, when I got my master's degree in business, I was doing an evening program where you had to have had a job for at least 2 years before you can even apply to get an evening MBA. And we had one class where they let daytime MBA students, so those are students who went directly from undergrad right into the master's program. And this young lady asked, I don't understand, if things aren't working well in your job, why can't you just tell your boss that it's not the right way to do things? And those of us who had been through the bloody noses of dealing with management and stuff, we all just started to chuckle. And she very innocently didn't understand what was the joke. And it's just because she didn't have that experience to know that the politics of the workplace will always sort of dictate how you behave. So this is not a problem that's new to you. It has not much to do with the fact that you're a student. I don't, I don't, this is a challenge you'll probably have for the rest of your life. So how do you deal with that? I think one way to deal with that is to ask good questions or questions that you think are relevant. Try to gather the information that you can before you sort of offer, what if we did it this way? I don't think you should be afraid to offer suggestions for how things work, but it might even be better to say, can you explain to me, or can you help me understand why this approach is not something we do today? Is there a reason why that doesn't work? The idea that you're seeking information is often creates sort of an opening to a conversation rather than a barrier to a conversation. I worked as a software consultant for over 10 years, and a little trick that I learned when I was stepping into a difficult situation, because nobody hires a consultant when things are going well, right? You're always stepping into a mess. And unfortunately, you were probably hired into the mess by a boss who felt like maybe their other employees caused the mess. And that's not a great situation to walk into. You're immediately walking into a hostile environment. And one of the things that I generally fell back on is, look, I'm just here to help. How do you think we should fix this problem? And then grab onto whatever you think is appropriate and say, okay, I like your idea. How can I help make that happen? You can sort of, there's this whole psychology of dealing with people and dealing with difficult situations. And you can sort of steer people to a common solution if you convince them that their idea is the right idea. Even if you took something they said and you sort of massage that into a consensus idea, giving them all the credit for this is a good idea, I really like this, I want to help, often removes all those roadblocks that people run into when they think there's conflict, right? It's you against me instead of us being together. There's a great book, and I know it's cliche to recommend a book, but How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie has been a staple of business for 90 years now. In fact, when I was a manager, I had 50 direct reports. Whenever I'd send an email, I'd use the Dale Carnegie principles of communication, and they were written in the 1930s. And I'm using that for email. So, how did a person in the 30s give me advice on how to write email? It's just great advice on how to deal with difficult people or difficult situations and how to achieve common goals. So if you always try to approach a scenario of, I want to help solve a problem, but you try to find an avenue of being an ally rather than an adversary, it's one of those things that I don't feel like that's great advice, but it's kind of the best advice I have for you is when you're coming at it at a disadvantage, and if you believe your age or the fact that you're a student puts you at a disadvantage, when you're coming at things from a disadvantage, you need to try to find common ground. And you can do that by either trying to give away the credit, asking for help is also a way to create common ground, because now when you're asking for help and someone's giving you advice, now they are your advocate. They want you to succeed because they feel like, well, their success is dependent upon the fact that I give them good advice. So asking for advice can make someone an advocate. Was that helpful at all? I'm not even sure that was helpful at all.
That was pretty helpful.
Okay. There's always going to be a time in your life when you feel like I'm an underdog for this reason or that reason, and trying to find that a way to turn somebody into an ally and to avoid conflict. You're not always going to succeed, but finding ways to do that. There are some tricks that you can use to start conversations off on the right foot and steer them in the direction that you are hoping they can go. A lot of times in my experience, I'll walk into a situation and I'll believe I know the right way to solve this problem. The trick is I have to convince everyone else that my idea is the best way. And usually what I would do is I would ask a lot of questions. I would find that nugget of gold that I'd be like, all right, that's the way I'm going to lead us to the solution. And I would try to lead that person to my solution. But you know what? A lot of times along the way, we'd find a better path, and we'd steer away from my solution to something that was even better because we were working together. So it's hard. It's a life skill, and you really have to work at it. But that's the advice I can give.
I mean, I would agree with you, about that. Like, I know just, like, within kind of, like, my own team, like, I was kind of, like, the underdog because I became a captain my sophomore year, like, right after COVID. And, like, I was kind of just brought into the position just because, like, I was one of the few freshmen that were super active. But it was really hard my sophomore year because I wasn't exactly all friends. Like, I hadn't been friends with the juniors and seniors. Like, I didn't have a full year already under my belt. And so just kind of gaining that experience, and while it was really hard, like my sophomore year, like this past year has been absolutely amazing because a lot more of my friends, that are juniors now, like they all kind of have like that shared experience. But I definitely feel for you, like when you don't really feel like you're the underdog and like no one's really paying attention to you. And so just kind of listening and like trying to offer some help, but like sometimes being quiet and listening and then helping, later on, that's really helpful. I don't know if anyone else, like one of the students, has any perspective on that, but that's just kind of what I've seen just like within my own team. And
I mean, this is coming from a person who is like incredibly bad at everything Scott just talked about. Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, I think of the group of people we have, there's a lot of people here who had the experience of being a sophomore captain. At least, because I was put into a weird position where, because I was the only coder in my freshman year, I was the code lead by default. But there's definitely, I think I'm hoping that, as students, because I think, everyone who's on the board so far is pretty well known, within our area of first. And, I think that the people who are leaders, student leaders in first, are, I think that, as a whole, I hope that we'll be able to, work with people and just, offer help and see where it goes from there.
Before we go, there's one thing that I wrote down here that I want to chat with briefly and that's funding. So I mentioned that I'm the treasurer for Nightcrawler. I manage all the money that comes in. I know where it goes. I know where it comes in. I know where it goes. I would caution against putting too much emphasis on getting government funding. Government funding can be kind of fickle, can be really hard. It can take years to advocate for. There's a reason why people hire lobbyists to try to push their initiatives through Congress, and whether that's the state legislature or above. It's not to say you shouldn't try. I've talked to some of the folks that are trying to push the bill through the Minnesota State House right now to get the funding they're looking for, and it's not looking very good right now. Despite all of the legwork they did in the beginning, all the groundwork they laid, things are not going the way that they had hoped, and the bill's been sort of massaged and manipulated so that the funds can be used by more than just first, if it even passes. And so it can be really tricky. I will say something similar for the schools. I mean, if you guys can get funding through the schools increased, God bless you. I think it's a great thing. I don't think there's a single person in first who doesn't think that the school should put more money into first, comparable to what they put into the athletic programs or things like that. Again, those things happen at a very high level budget meeting. It's very hard to advocate at that level. And if you can do it, if you can get the legwork and get the support, I think that's fantastic. It's a big rock to push up a steep hill, in my experience. Now, you guys, some other people on the call may have different experiences, but it's hard. I think you have a whole lot more success obtaining funding. It's not a kind of a line item in a budget every single year. You kind of have to run out there and do the legwork every year a lot of times. But if you call up a business and say, hey, we know that you guys build circuit boards or you make pistons or whatever it is you make, do your research. We'd love to have our students come in and get a tour. Would you be willing to give a tour to 10 or 15 students? And you follow that up with a letter of, hey, we're a robotics team. XYZ of our funding comes from sponsors and businesses like yours. Would you be willing to support our team this year? That's a lot easier if you've already, if as a business owner, you've taken the pride of, I get to show some kids who are interested in what I do, how we do the things we do. That's really awesome. I have all that pride. And I've looked all of these students in the face, and then they send me a letter asking if I'll be a sponsor. And I have to say no to these kids that I just talked to last week, and I had a great time and they were interested in my stuff. And now I'm going to say I'm not interested in yours. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, but I can tell you that it's probably been the most successful type of cold relationships that we built with businesses in our area is by doing that type of thing. It takes a student and probably an adult dedicated to making those relationships happen to call out to 15 to 20 of those folks in a month and try to build those sponsors. The other thing that's a little bit easier, and quite frankly, maybe a lot easier, is to figure out when your students come in and they sign up at the beginning of the year, ask them, where do your parents work? And identify the businesses where the parents are employed, and then work with the parent, work with the business to say, hey, we see that you work for Cabela's, or we see that you work at 3M. Would you be willing to help us get in touch with the right people and see if they're interested in sponsoring our team? I will say for Nightcrawler, almost all of our sponsors, not all of them, but almost all of our sponsors have a relationship with a mentor or with a parent of a student on the team. And it's sort of low-hanging fruit to try to build those relationships. I think it's important that, especially in this economy, when people are tightening their budgets, we've lost sponsors. Our sponsors that we did retain, many of them lowered their sponsorship contributions. I think it's important to show value to the business too. So the idea that, hey, we'll come in and do a demo. When are you doing your summer picnic? We'd love to bring a robot by and show it off to your employees and their families. If you can do those types of things, if you have the capacity to do those types of things, I also think that solidifies that relationship, and it makes the call the following year to ask for sponsorship dollars a little bit easier. It's a hard problem to solve. It definitely is.
From a student perspective, I know my team has it pretty good. Our school pays for like all of our entry fees, and they'll help pay for transportation and stuff like that. One of the ways we got that was like one of our kids has a parent on the school board, and a couple of our team leads are in the activities office 3 or 4 times a week. Like, we make friends with the higher ups in our school, and that makes them want us to get better funding. It makes them have a personal like reason to help us, which humans are inherently selfish. They want the things that they want to do well. And for like businesses are so desperate for workers and new skill that like we've been going to Chamber of Commerce meetings, and they're like eating out of our hand. They're like, oh my God, it is great that there are students here. Oh my God, you want to be engineers? Great, here's $1,000. Like, they just really want students to do well. They want us to be their future workforce, and playing on that has really helped us. Like, we've raised $70,000 this year.
Yeah, I think those are great strategies. I think they're really, really great strategies. And I feel like it's a lot easier, as hard as it is, it's a lot easier to get money out of the private sector. So from private donors or from businesses, I think it's a lot easier to get money out of the private sector than the public sector. Trying to get money out of governments. I mean, I agree 100% with you about schools. If you can get relationships within schools, show that your existence within schools is important. Whether that's just being present, whether it's running a ton of volunteer hours to support concessions or whatever it is that your school does. We shoot T-shirts from our robot for pep rallies and for homecoming and all of those things, and we have good visibility in the school. Whatever you can do to build that relationship is great. And if you can get that to translate into funding within the school, God, fantastic, right? But I do think that it's a lot easier to pull money out of the private sector, in my experience, than out of the public sector. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. I don't want to discourage you from trying, but I think it means that you need to try multiple approaches in different places. We're at 8:30. Any other last bits of, if any of you want to talk to me, have a phone call, do a Zoom call, I am happy to do that anytime you want. Giving advice to entrepreneurs is something I used to do on a weekly basis back in the day. I'm happy to share business advice or just general kind of how to communicate with difficult people, whatever it might be. Anything I can do to help, I'm willing to do that.
Question for students: is there a place to find a written in words what leadership, what the student board looks like and what the purposes are? All of the things that you shared verbally in this meeting, is there a written element of that? Is there a place that we can find that?
I know we created a planning doc before this meeting started.
Yeah. We don't currently have a website or any social media right now since we're still trying to get it up and started. But we want to get a website and then social media up and started. Since everyone's been busy with competitions too, since we had Worlds and State back to back. So that
we have our AP test.
Yeah. Yep.
Ian, have you ever done web programming?
I took an HTML course in 7th grade. I
know you're a coder. I don't know who else is on this call as a coder. If you're going to put up a web page, I would highly recommend looking at GitHub Pages. It's free.
I would use GitHub Pages probably.
Yeah, GitHub Pages. I will say that GitHub will recommend that you set up Jekyll as the builder environment for that. That's hard to do on a PC. We really struggled, especially with the last Windows update. If you have a Mac, I think it goes a lot easier. But there's other options, you can use Go, I guess. There's a programming language called Go that you can use to build your static pages. I think we might try to switch to that over the summer. If you need help with GitHub Pages, that's what Mike Kelly uses. I'm happy to help for anybody who wants help building a site.
Lexi had mentioned a process for onboarding to the board at the start of the meeting. Can you give sort of an overview of what that looks like, what that process looks like right now? Are you accepting new folks onto the board, or is that
That was directed at the students, right?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. I would say right now we are kind of trying to recruit students from specific sections. We had it written down on a document, but I think we do want to have a specific group of students from each specific Minnesota high school section, but then we still want to have students involved that aren't part of just the people we found from each section. So I think we still have a lot that we're working on and getting all the students involved. We're just trying to get it started up, get people thinking about it. But once we start finding that stuff out, I know you have Ian's number, right? And all that stuff. So we can get that sent out to you, and then we can get that sent out to the different hubs and stuff, since a lot of, you guys mentors, you guys will help us out with that. And we're just really thankful for everything, getting on this call tonight and spending your time just listening to and helping us out. And so thank you guys. I think it's been really helpful.
Does anyone have the link for the was it Twin Cities Leadership Discord?
Yeah, I could probably get that too. I'll leave my Discord in the comments so that you could probably reach out to me, or and then I could get it later there. Just because we have a little bit of a process to get people in. But yeah.
All right. Does anybody have any thoughts on what we should talk about next week? I'll just make something up and send it out. Or are we getting to the end? States get done. Nobody wants to talk about robotics on Sundays anymore.
I'm always down to talk about robotics on Sundays.
Another thing to keep in mind, though, is that next week is Mother's Day.
Oh, yeah, we can't do it next week.
Yeah.
You get to spend time with your moms.
Aw, can't do robotics. Gotta be, hang out with my mom.
You gotta bring your mom to the meeting.
And the
Oh yeah, we could bring your mom.
Yeah, and then we could have like parents complain the entire meetings about how during robotics season we all disappear for like 3 months.
I think the following week is Memorial Day too. A lot of people might not even be around. I'll be camping, so I won't even be around. I think if it's Memorial Day. Dang it, we may have a big stretch here without a call.
No, the next weekend's the 21st. That's not Memorial Day yet.
But is that Mother's Day? Oh, you're talking about the weekend.
No, next weekend is Memorial Day. The weekend after that is the 21st. That's
so
not
we can
Memorial
do a
Day
call on the 21st. All right. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to. Maybe what I'll do is everybody that signed up for the mailing list, they said here are the things I'd like to talk about. Maybe I'll dig through that list and see if there's anything in there that is a common thread, and I'll just pick something off that list and we'll send it out.
Yeah, and if you could get people to do like meetings about more technical stuff, because I know like this original I started as like, a technical thing for Swerve Drive, and I watched, because I wasn't at that one, but I watched it when our team was putting together a Swerve Drive after North Star, and it was really valuable for us to see, okay, these are all the common problems that people are encountering, and keeping those in mind, it saved us, a lot of troubleshooting. We were able to, get it coded and running in one day after it was built.
Nice. Maybe we should do. I do recall that there were several people that are asking about Onshape. Maybe we should do a little session on Onshape and specifically how to like import Andy Mark parts and Vex parts and things like that, and how to do. Like maybe we should just build a robot chassis during a meeting and give people the tips and tricks for how to do that in Onshape.
I think definitely doing some Onshape, because I know our team's struggling in the CAD department because we don't have any dedicated CAD mentors, and our CAD people are graduating this year, and so I've been like, and so now I'm teaching myself CAD because I'm bored and don't want.
Meeting on CAD would be really nice because
I taught myself. Oh, sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
No, you can finish.
I taught myself how to CAD because I wanted to make some things to 3D print for myself. But then I always was like, how in the world would I put in a gearbox? I don't even understand how to do this. And I finally forced myself to go watch some videos on it. I'm like, oh, that's not that hard. That actually is kind of easy. So just getting past that initial hurdle of how would I create a piece of 1x2 box aluminum and how would I attach it to a swerve module? Maybe that's enough to get people to go out and explore on their own. Yeah. All right, I think we've decided. Let's do that. Let's plan to do a little intro to CAD Onshape for folks, and we'll make that our next call.
Do you also want to include like what you guys use for CAD in that? Like just like a general?
Well, I think Onshape is everything I've heard from people is that a lot of teams have finally they're not finally. A lot of people have started transitioning away from SolidWorks to Onshape because you can collaborate online immediately, where with SolidWorks you have to put it in GrabCAD and someone's got to download it. Onshape also has version control, so you can go back and see what changed. So I don't know. I feel like Onshape has become the more popular version, and we should do that.
All right, that makes sense.
I'd have to knock a lot of rust off of my SolidWorks skills. I haven't done SolidWorks in almost 2 years. So I think let's do Onshape. Plus, it's all open source, so you guys can pull down all the models from everybody else. If you go out and search for like Andy Mark parts, if you like punch in the model number of an Andy Mark part, you might go out and find yourself a whole bunch of other teams' robots because they're probably all open source, and you can. I have seen that where I was looking for a Pixie Cam because I wanted to put the Pixie Cam model on a robot, and I ended up running across 3 other teams' robots because they had put the Pixie Cam on their robot too. It was kind of fun. All right, that's the plan. Again, I think the mentors here, we want to help wherever we can. You certainly can contact me. I'd be happy to help. If you guys approach problems with a positive attitude and a willingness to kind of be part of the solution, I don't know why anybody would, just immediately turn you away. Different people have different reasons for different things, but let me know how I can help. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's FRC Roundtable. Join us live all season long, every Sunday night. Visit the website at team2052.com/roundtable to sign up for weekly invites. In the meantime, keep building, keep learning, and we'll see you next week.